Good morning and welcome to the Point. Another week of the lame duck legislative session is now history, and still there's no agreement about what we should do about Michigan roads. A lame duck session happens after an election. Some of those members have been reelected. Some are moving on to other offices. Some have been voted out of office and some are term limited, but those are the people who will make decisions that will impact you and me for a long time to come. Perhaps the biggest decision they have to consider is what to do about Michigan roads. Governor says it will cost $1.2 billion a year for the next 10 years to get the roads back into shape. But the question is how to pay for it. There are two competing plans. One in the House that would switch taxes, the other in the Senate that would raise taxes by $1.2 billion. The governor supports the gas tax increase. We sat down with him late last week to talk about what he expects to happen in the rest of this session and also talk about an internet tax collection system that has since passed both the House and Senate. Our conversation this morning with Governor Rick Snyder. Governor, obviously there are some things that we're going to talk about, but we've got to start with roads. You've been talking about this for the better part of your first administration, the time that you've been in office, talking about roads. We know a lot of discussions going on right now. As you and I sit here today, I think you just came out of a meeting that you're not going to tell me what happened, but you have been talking with the leaders. How optimistic are you?
Well, I think there's a reasonably good opportunity to get something done, Rick, and it's important. Our roads aren't good. I haven't found a citizen yet that likes our roads, and we need to improve them. The challenge is it requires a revenue increase, a tax increase in some fashion. And so that's very difficult for legislators to deal with, and that's why I'm encouraging citizens to contact their legislator and not get upset with them over the roads, but really give them positive reinforcement to say, please do something. Let's get something done now.
One of the legislators I talked to just after you were in Grand Rapids said, yeah, they're calling, but they're not calling to tell us to raise taxes. They're calling to say we pay enough taxes. So when citizens are calling, some obviously say do that, but some might be more in line with what the House has proposed doing, which would be what I would call, you may disagree, a tax shift by taking that 6 cents sales tax and putting it into roads. But that's problematic when it comes for schools and municipalities. So you're still in favor or still supporting the Senate plan?
Yeah, because it would be, I view it as asking too much or causing too many difficulties to say, let's just shift dollars to roads at the expense of schools and our local partners. All that does is move the problem around. Let's solve the problem.
One of my best sources in the legislature, a solid member who has been around for a while, said that they agree that roads need to be fixed. They support you as the governor of the state, but they question if the state's economy is healthy enough to go back to the citizens of Michigan and ask for a sizable increase. $1.2 billion is a lot of money, even spread across the entire populace. Do you think the economy is healthy enough to do that?
Yeah, a couple things, Rick. It would be phased in over 3 or 4 years. The other thing is think about the savings in terms of just vehicle damage caused by our roads. How many people had a blown tire or bent rim this last year or so? That's hundreds of dollars. And so when you run across anybody in that school, all you got to do is ask them, would you rather put that in the roads or do you want to keep on having repairs? Because the thing people have to remember is our roads aren't going to get any better. In fact, they're going to be worse than they were this last year until we really start investing more in them.
When you and I last spoke, you pointed out that the legislature is your partner. You don't tell them what to do. That's something that some governors don't always realize, but all of that being true, is this a real leadership test for you to try to bring these sides together and get to the point where you want to be by whatever means of persuasion that you can use, particularly with House members?
Well, everything I do is a leadership test, if you look at it, and we've been successful in so many of them. The other one is, to put this in context, the last time this was done was back in '97, and it took multiple years to get to that point. So when you talk about difficult things to do, the roads are one of the toughest issues, or our infrastructure expenses, and historically it's been multiple years to get there. We're doing relatively well on that scale, but I'd really like to get this done now because I think there's a good environment to say it's time. And if you look at it, we're through the election cycle, we're in lame duck. Let's get this wrapped up.
And you have expressed optimism, and I know you don't like hypotheticals, but as a practical matter, to use a phrase you like, it would be easier to do it with this legislature than the new legislature coming in.
That's the way most people are looking at it in terms of the makeup of the legislature. Again, the way I view it, if it doesn't happen now, I'm going to be right back at it. I have that concept of relentless positive action, and the relentless part has been applicable here, and it's going to continue until we get a better solution.
Let's talk for a moment about something else that is in lame duck that has gotten a lot of conversation, and that is, it's been referred to as an internet tax. It is indeed a 6% tax that has been on the books forever. People are supposed to pay it. In fact, there's a place on the bottom of your income tax form to fill it out. We know, the Treasury knows, that not everybody does. There is likely to be a bill that comes to your desk for you to look at sometime during the Christmas holiday that would have those people that provide those internet services collect that tax and send it back to the state. You support that?
Well, the one, I'm not sure if you're talking about Main Street Fairness.
Yes, that's the one.
Yeah, in terms of really saying, again, a lot of people are buying their goods and services over the internet. And technically, they owe use tax on that to the state of Michigan. They're supposed to file that return with their individual income tax return. We don't get a lot of those returns. So it's a tax that's already owed, and by passing some legislation, we could make it so it's collected more by the people that are selling the goods. I think that's better tax administration. So generally, I'm in favor of the concept. It'll also make it a fair playing field between our local merchants in the communities and people on the internet selling goods and services. So it's something, I'm not sure it's going to make it through the legislature, but conceptually it moves in the right direction, and it's not a tax increase. It's really how you collect the tax.
When you look at this lame duck section, I know it's roads, roads, roads. Is there anything else that you really hope that the legislature deals with, or perhaps hopes they don't?
Well, there's a lot of other kind of issues, but the major one by far is roads. So if I did my list and you asked me for the top 25, well, I'd probably have to be thinking what's number 26.
The idea that this state is the birthplace of the automobile and that's so much of our identity. At one hand, fixing the roads is just a practical matter for those of us who have to travel. Is it also an economic development issue? Because in talking with some of the folks over in West Michigan, they actually plan out their routes to get from point A to point B when they're showing people around to avoid bad roads. Is that part of your reckoning in this?
Well, it is. It's about job creation. And one, there's the whole commercial side, commercial industrial side, that if you're transporting major goods and services, semi-loads of stuff, you want good roads to run on. And that's part of the decision-making process about good logistics for goods and services. So that's jobs. And the part you mentioned in particular, Rick, there's a pure Michigan element of this. To have people say they want a positive experience in Michigan, to be bouncing around the roads doesn't help. One in particular is we've seen a lot more in terms of motorcycle touring. Clearly, if you're in that, you don't want to hit a pothole. So we find it does make a difference and would make a difference for pure Michigan plus the industrial side. So I view this as a job creator, not just the construction jobs, but long-term job creation.
All right, that's today. That's what's going on now. Let's talk about what happened in November. Mm-hmm. You and I talked regularly about the election cycle. Going into that re-election cycle, many people looked at you as the incumbent governor of this state as somebody who had a very solid hand to play politically. It became a pretty tight race. In fact, we had numbers, I don't know what your internals showed, but our numbers showed within the margin of error going into those final few days. You were successful. You will have another term. But was it at the end of the day a closer campaign, a closer election than you anticipated?
Well, I never take those things for granted. And to be open with you, that's my second election. So I don't have a lot of track record because I'm not a career politician. One thing that was interesting, if you looked across the country for both Republicans and Democrats, for governors in particular, I think it probably set a record. There were probably 10 to 12 races across the country that were within the margin of error. That's unheard of. And I think it's much of the political environment out there about how involved people are. It's creating an environment where things can be close. But the good part is it worked out because I had confidence. We've done a lot of great things over the last few years. I've done some challenging things, taken on a lot of tough issues, which can lose you some votes. But I'm proud of my record, and I'm going to keep it up.
If you extrapolate from those results that we have a pretty narrowly divided electorate, does that help you when you go in to your next agenda by saying to people in your party, the Republican Party, that we have issue X that may not be to your liking? Does that make it easier for you to reach across the aisle and also try to work with Democrats, as you have in the past on things like Medicaid expansion?
Well, I try to do that on everything, but I think your assessment of the state's pretty good. Again, we're probably more Democratic than Republican, but then we have a large section of independents. So we're one of those states that can swing many different ways. And the good part is if you go back to the election, I did very well with independents. Probably 60% plus of the independents voted for me. So it does hopefully give me the ability to communicate one direction or the other to say, hey, there are a lot of people out there that are in the middle in some fashion that really would like to see something done. So let's get something to happen on a particular issue.
While the governor was busy meeting with leaders in the House and Senate talking about roads, there was a political website that was talking about the governor and what his potential aspirations might be when it comes to national political office. That's part of our conversation when we come back to the point. Welcome back to the point. Governor Rick Snyder has just been reelected to his second and final term as governor of the state of Michigan. Before this, he has held no political office, and for many, this newcomer is a bit of an anomaly. But already, as he begins to enter that second term, there is some conversation about what happens next. Does he have national aspirations? Well, later in this interview, we'll talk about that. But now we continue with our conversation with Governor Rick Snyder. We have talked about your agenda for a second term leading up to this, and I know that one of the things you've talked about is job training, getting people matched up to those jobs out there. But give me, if you will, your top 3 or 4 or 5 issues that you want, and I know you'll save some of those for your inaugural speech, and on January 20th, your State of the State will come out. But to the degree that you can, what are the things you want to focus on as after you take that second oath and start this next 4 years?
Yeah, an absolute top priority is the one you alluded to, which is the whole issue about career tech education and the skilled trades in particular. What we did quite a few years ago nationally is we sort of told everyone to get a university degree. And we did that at the expense of having an equally honorable, equally respected track for the skilled trades through career tech education. And when I say skilled trades, it's everything in manufacturing through agriculture these days. I want Michigan to be the leader in that for a couple of reasons. One is we have tens of thousands of jobs open today that are good, well-paying, longer-term career opportunities that we should be filling. And we have people that are looking for work. They need to get the training they need to be successful there. The other one is if you talk to companies across the country, they're starved for these people. And in fact, one of the key decisions to have them either grow or come to Michigan is if we've got a great pool of those people with those skill sets, they're going to come to Michigan. So I view it as an economic advantage for us to be the leader in that. So that's one key item. Good government I want to continue. Make sure we're balancing budgets, paying down our long-term debt. We've got a good track record, but we have to keep that up. Education, particularly in that phase from prenatal through 3rd grade. There's a lot of more work we can do there to make sure young people are able to read by 3rd grade. That's critically important. And then the other part of education that really stands out is the intersection between high school and higher education, whether it be career tech education, dual enrollment. We can bring a lot more clarity and make it much more seamless and easy to work through those systems. So that's a second focus area in the educational realm.
Let's talk about education for just a minute, because you talked about a couple of things there that have already been discussed a little bit in the legislature. That idea that early childhood education is a vital part of all children's development is something you've already addressed. You've put more money into early childhood education. You've suggested that you have a desire to do more of that. There's also a move afoot to have a standardized test for 3rd grade reading, if I understand it. I take it the legislature is not going to deal with that in lame duck, but is that something you're going to be pressing next year if they don't?
Yeah, again, we always need to strike a balance, though, about standardized testing. You can have too much of it, but it is important to do, so we can have a benchmark. So it's really having a discussion about what's the right amount of testing and where to do it. 3rd grade reading is one of those benchmarks. If you're successful at that point in your educational career, you're on a good path. If you're not, you're probably in trouble in some fashion. So that's why it is so important. But my point is about helping people prepare for that. You don't wait until 3rd grade. That's where the early childhood's very important. The prenatal can be in those other grades. So let's look at that whole system to say, how do we strengthen the capabilities to make sure our young people are ready by 3rd grade to read?
When you talk education, there are 2 things that will come up every time I walk into the rotunda over there. People will talk about education funding, and they'll talk about Common Core. Let's start about dollars and cents first. That's been something that you have dealt with all through this past campaign and for the 4 years you've been governor, talking about money, not necessarily all of that money going directly to per pupil costs, because you talked about the long-term debt problem that the state has. But tell me about what you see as education funding going forward. understanding that you don't know what all the revenues will be going for.
Yeah, in terms of funding, I would hope we're clearly going to continue increases there, just like we have been. But we do have to finish up some additional funding for the retirement system. There's a year or so required of additional payments there, and then it sort of levels off, Rick. So the good part is we're almost to the kind of the peak point in terms of additional requirements. So that's important to take care of that. But the other thing is, it's not just about spending money. This goes back to how we were talking about third grade reading, about assessing where we stand. It's about student growth. So let's make sure we're spending resources in areas where we're seeing real results. And if we have to tune that or tailor that to make sure we're seeing the best results for the children, that's what should come first.
Common Core is an issue that has been both exaggerated and perhaps not discussed fully enough. It has been greatly touted and greatly maligned, and there is a real division among people within your party and within people that you talk to on the street about Common Core. Give me your take on Common Core and what it means to Michigan.
Yeah, Common Core unfortunately probably has more of this other stuff associated with it than looking at the facts. Because I like to start when people say about Common Core, I say stop for a second. What Common Core is a higher set of standards that we want our children to achieve in terms of educational attainment. It's not curriculum. It's not how to teach it. It's when you're done, should the students be able to do these things? And I ask people, forget about the name Common Core. Would you like to have higher or lower standards for your children? Almost everyone will say, we want high standards. So that's the starting point. Don't get bogged down in what it's called. Common Core actually came from the governors and the states. And it's been adopted by many, many states. Where it started getting in trouble is when the federal government started adopting it and sort of tying it into their different purposes. The tide sort of turned with many people on not liking Common Core then. But the basic premise of having higher standards for our kids is a good thing when you're allowing local flexibility on what to teach. So let's talk about high standards for our kids, whether it's Common Core or not.
The internet is rife with examples of what people say are Common Core questions. Your position is that Common Core doesn't come with a curriculum handbook, only with benchmark levels. So if that's the case, within the state of Michigan, is it the Board of Education, the local school districts? Who comes up with the way to get to that
Well, the local school boards, the local schools do their curriculum largely. Again, there are some guidelines, there are some requirements, but we've actually added flexibility, and that shows how the system can work. A great illustration, we were talking about career tech education earlier, is one of the things we did this last year was, I'll use Algebra 2 as a very specific illustration, because a lot of people have trouble with Algebra 2. If you're not a X, Y, and Z kind of math solving person, it's difficult. So what we did is we allowed it to happen in career tech education classes, like a welding class. If you could meet the requirements, do the same thing you need to in a welding class that you would do in Algebra 2, except now you're talking about how to weld this piece of metal to that piece of metal, it works. So what we've done is allow a lot more flexibility, a lot more on the career tech ed side to teach the same concepts and ideas and fulfill your requirements that way. I think that was a great outcome that shows how you can take those kind of competing perspectives and show they're not really different, they can align.
We've got about 4 minutes left. I got a lot of ground to cover, but I do want to talk about something that you talked to me about maybe as early as 3 years ago, and that's the city of Detroit going through bankruptcy. You said to me that if things in Detroit could be righted, if you could get police service, get the lights turned back on, get services back on, it would be one of the best values on the globe. People are buying property in Detroit at a pretty rapid clip right now. So looking back 2.5 years, do you think you called it right?
It worked. The good part is we're out of bankruptcy. So when no one has to talk about Detroit's bankruptcy anymore, it's a closed chapter. And we're on a chapter now that everyone can focus on growing Detroit. And just as you said, Rick, if you look at it even over the last year while the bankruptcy was going on, streetlights were going on, public safety improvements took place, blight was being removed. So many great things are going on in Detroit. It's exciting. There's a lot more work, particularly in the neighborhoods, to do, but it's a success story that we should be really proud of that's going to add benefit to all of Michigan.
I know you don't like to think of yourself as a career politician, and in fairness, you're not, but did you ever calculate the political part of taking Detroit through a bankruptcy, about having to come up with the grand bargain? Because there are certainly some people in outstate Michigan that aren't excited about spending their tax money in Detroit. There's some people in Detroit that weren't excited about what they saw as the state coming in and tell them what to do. I mean, potentially that was a minefield to walk through.
Well, there are a lot of political issues out there, but again, this is where not being a career politician or trying to rise above that, hopefully when you stay focused on what is the common sense answer, the right thing to do, it works out. It's not a straight line sometimes because of politics, but you get to the end result, eventually people will recognize what a good thing it is. And use the Detroit bankruptcy as an illustration. Where we are today in Detroit. When I took us into bankruptcy, how many people were critical of that, thinking that wasn't going to work? How many problems? I mean, that was viewed negatively by a whole lot of people. A lot of those people now say, wow, didn't it turn out good?
I saved this last question for last because I didn't want to be asked to leave early, but there's an article in Politico that you are well aware of. And on this date where you're going to do several interviews with several different television stations, you're going to be asked several times. So I'm going to ask it in this form. You and I have talked about your future, and your answer is, I'm focused on being the best governor of Michigan that I can be, and that would be your answer today. So let me
Well, you
ask
could stop right there then.
let me ask it a different way. Given what you know about the absolute brutality that political campaigns can bring upon a candidate and their family, given what you know about the political landscape, that Karl Rove in the past couple of weeks listed your name along with 22 others that were potential Republican presidential candidates, how seriously do you look at national politics for Rick Snyder?
Yeah, well, again, I'm focusing on Michigan. So you gave the answer already, Rick. But what I'd say is when we look at leadership in our country, I think the best place to look are the governors and where the country is. So the good part is we've got a great crop of governors out there, Republican governors that have been successful in so many different ways. And so the good part is there's a good talent pool out there for people to look at. Because compared to some of the other backgrounds, I think the executive experience and everything else is the best preparation you could have for that position.
So, what's in the political future for the governor? We don't know and probably won't for some time, but we do know that he's going to start traveling the country talking about the Michigan comeback. And when we come back, we'll have more to the point. Starting Monday, the legislature comes back for what will be their final week of lame duck session. Yes, it is a rare Monday session for senators who will start at noon and could be there for some time trying to figure out exactly what to do about roads. It's anticipated that leadership will have a new plan, some type of a compromise to roll out, and that vote could come as early as Tuesday, perhaps Wednesday of next week. We'll be there and back here next Sunday to bring it to you to the point.